Hi there, I am Nu-Trix, and today we're talking about the TR-8S, especially the triggering possibilities that you can have with that. One of the coolest things of the TR features, and many of the TR and the boutique synths that Roland came out in the last years, is the feature that you can actually use trigger. And it might be weird for some people, but those who actually come from the analog world where you have these things trigger out and trigger in, and CV out and CV in, and gate out and gate in, you know what I'm talking about. Now for the others, I'm still going to take time to explain what it is, because it's kind of a somewhat, for some people it might be just weird what it is. Trigger is about sending electricity variation, if you want, in a different manner. The CV is a continuous value change from, a minimum to a maximum value. So there's a movement in it that can be slow or fast. So it could control anything. It could be a LFO sending control over something else. A trigger is just a value that goes up and down very quickly. So just like on, it just triggers it. And a gate is a trigger with a time. So it's a open, close. So like value, no value. So the difference between a trigger and a gate is that the gate has a length of, part of the signal, whereas the trigger is just like on and it stops, on and it stops. So that's the difference in how you can use them. But what we'll talk today about is how the TR-8S can be somewhat of a master of your triggering devices. Now, in this case, I'm going to use the SE02 because it has trigger input and it has an internal sequencer. So we will sync the sequencer, not just the tempo, but also which steps are actually being played or not. That's going to be an interesting way to do that. Also, we're going to use the SH01A because it has a sequencer and also can be synced to trigger. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, if you look at the back of the TR-8S, whoa, that's too far. If you look at the back of the TR-8S, there is a trigger connector. So of course, if you connect your trigger connector to the trigger in, then you've got some type of triggering value. But on top of that, you've got 6 assignable output at the back of the TR-8S. And these 6 can be also trigger out. So that's really cool. That's where you can actually use that. Now, you can use the trigger out, and actually you're using 6 of the different sounds to trigger. It doesn't mean that you're actually going to hear these sound through the triggering out, but it means that these patterns of sound, let's say you take the hi-hat. Well, the hi-hat, close hi-hat could be, this pattern could be the pattern that is sent through the trigger out. So now let's look into how you actually assign each of these to be able to do that. Let's actually look at how to connect it and then look into each devices how to do it. But first, let's just understand that we need to tell the TR-8S that he's the master and he's sending these 2 signals. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 different sequences on the 2 devices, like a sequence on the SE02 and a sequence on the SH01A, and it will not be triggered the same way. So I will have 2 different triggering messages saying to these 2 devices, so it will change the way they react. And they're going to be separate, so one sending the other. So they're not going to get the same message. That's going to be interesting. So we need to set up the internal information in the TR-8S. We need to set up the internal value of the SE02 to receive the information and sync to it. And same thing for the SH01 to be a slave to the trigger input. And then we need to connect it. So let's go closer and do that. Okay, so what we see here is the TR-8S, and what we're going to do is just look at the back, see how it's connected. So what I did, I took one cable, this is a trigger cable here, from trigger out, and sent it to the SE02. And I took another cable here, and I've got an adapter because I'm going from a 1/4 inch, and I'm sending that to my SH01. Okay? The SH I'm going to connect the other end of the cable into external clock in, and that's going to trigger each step of the sequencer at the moment that we have the steps here. That's In this case right now, on this one I'm on, yeah, this. So I'm just going to make you listen to the sound of this thing. Wait. So that's the sequence you're hearing. It's in sync actually. Okay, if I pull it out. That's the tempo. I can change the tempo the way I want. Okay. Stop it. Extra clock in. Now it changes. Okay, so that's just in sync. But what's really cool is you stop it, stop, play back, and then let's say I'm not going to trigger here. So it's actually going to go from 1 to 12, and it's going to play the 12 steps of the 16 steps of this one, and then I'm going to stop. And then when it goes back to 1, it's going to play the steps that you have in the SH from 13, 14, 16, 15, and 16. So it's going to continue the internal sequence here, but at 1. So it's going to kind of, you know, move away and jump over, not actually jump over, no, it's going to wait. And if that note is a sustained note, because if it's linked to 12 to 13, it's going to sustain until that one plays. So let's try that. Okay. See, it doesn't stop now. So that's pretty fun. I mean, you can basically do a totally new rhythm of notes. It's the same notes playing, but you're just selecting where the step's going to play or when they're going to play. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to keep these last 4 not playing, and then I'm going to bring the volume down for this one. And if I want to hear the SH or the SE2, let's go back to this one. The SE2, you need to tell them it's going to be in sync mode. So you need to go and you're in sequencer here. Okay, you're in sequencer. You're going to press on these 2 at the same time to get into the editing mode. You have the second one is for syncing, and then you choose with the value here. You change between USB, MIDI, internal, and when you see trigger, you press on the value to save it, and you go yes, you're sure. So you're saving the fact that it's going to be sync to the trigger input, and then you have your trigger in, and the trigger in, not in the gate, not in the CV, in the trigger. Okay, so now if I press play here, sequence not working. If I take it out and press play, sequence not working. If I'm going to go in here, I'm changing the trigger to internal, and I go yes, and yes, sure. And if I press play again, I should hear something. Here we go. Bring the volume up. So that's the internal sequence here. Okay, so I've got this one playing. Now, if I go back and I'm saying no, not internal, I want it to be trigger synced. I'm going to save it. Yes, I'm sure. And if I press play here, it's waiting. It's waiting for the trigger. So I put the trigger in, and then that trigger comes out of the trigger out of the TR-8. Now, the TR-8 to work correctly, again, depending on where you connect it. Now, if I press play on the TR-8, we should have something like. to be sure they started at the beginning, and then start again. Okay, so this works. If I go here again, I press on these two, because now I'm controlling the trigger out, the dedicated trigger out. Again, if I do like this, but then it doesn't play the same at the same time, because it actually plays the other notes. To be sure you start again correctly, you stop two of them and you start them again. Stop, stop. Stop, stop, and again. Let's say that's what I want. Okay, I'm going to stop these two. Now, to be sure that you can actually use the other trigger, so that's, right now I'm using the trigger out because I pressed on these two, so it's a dedicated out that is in the back of the machine. If I only select the other one, the SH is actually using the assignable output number 6. So to get into that option, it's in the menu here. So you would have to go into, and look carefully, this is going to be really interesting. Go Shift and Kit, and Shift Kit, there's an option here. There's different options, you know, like move around until you get into something called output. And first of all, output, you've got the one I'm using, rim shot here. Okay, this one, that's the one I'm going to use for as a trigger. It's assigned, you could press enter, you can assign it to mix, so it's going to be in the stereo out. You can assign to different outputs, like the 6 in this case, but if you assign it to 6, what I find is you actually hear it in the mix and in the 6 at the same time. So that's, if I do this, I'm going to hear the pattern of this thing. But if that's not what I want, I don't want to hear it. I only want to use this. Sorry, I'm going to stop and this. I only want to use this as a trigger. So then instead of assigning to assign 6, I'm assigning to C, which is kind of the A, B, C being the 3 stereo outputs. And then I don't hear it anymore. It's just assigned to that. So if I press play, I don't hear it. So this now is really just a trigger sequence at the bottom here. So what I have now, I've got the rim shot being triggering the SC02. So they're ready to play. So if I go with this one, I'm going to have only the last 4 not playing. That's going to be for the SH. And if you look at the trigger, I'm going to have 7 and 8 won't play, and the 15, 16 won't play. If I go back to this one, let's say I'm going to take 12 also out. If I press play now, I'm going to have the drum playing. I'm going to have SC02 playing for 1 to 6 and 9 to 14. And then when it starts over, it's going to go to the next step in the sequence. So every time it's going to play, it's going to take a lot of sequence before you go back to normal. And same thing here. So I'm going to play step 1 to 11, then it's going to stop. And then when it goes back here, it's going to play the 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 of the internal sequence of the SH. Okay, let's try that. not the best song I made, but the logic is you can actually have, I'm going to stop these in this one. So really the logic is you can actually, if you have these two playing at the same time, it's possible to have 6 different controllers like this, plus the trigger out. So you can actually control 7 different, slave of trigger, and have a very complex melody evolving through time. And that could be really interesting, because it could, the way you program this with how these other responds to it, it actually could go and have a very complex evolution of a song, and really just having it press start and the rest is just like evolving gradually. So that's it. That's basically how you set it up, and then the rest is you making the right decision. So musically it creates something that it really is cool. So that's it. That's one of the coolest things you can do with these devices, having trigger out and trigger in. And in a loop like that, you can have a lot of evolution and change just because you're playing different notes, and the sequence that you have is not exactly the same length of the sequence that you're triggering with the steps. So it takes like 5, 6 different run or patterns, if you want, before you actually get back to the original. So it gives a lot of movement in the notes without having to have more than one pattern. So it's really interesting to play with, and I suggest if you have these devices, test it out, have fun with that. It's going to be really cool. That's it. I'm Nu-Trix, the synth guy, and if you like what I'm doing, thumb up, share it to your friends, and put the little alarm so you get a notification every time I have a new video out. And that's it, guys. Cheers.